Hello, my name is Lannetta Lockhart, and today I will be discussing the legacy of Thomas Jefferson. It is interesting to realize that many of the forefathers led lives that paralleled those of their political ambitions, and through that, research has indicated that there's different levels to these men. Thomas Jefferson is no different. As I studied for this discussion board, it was interesting to see that Thomas Jefferson was more than just a forefather, and that should be something that was obvious. But having grown up in the 80s and learned about these forefathers in school, in my mind, they were these great men who did great things that essentially lived perfect lives, were now what I thought was solid Christians. But through this course and through the study of history, we realize that those ideals that are attached to these forefathers may not necessarily hold as much authenticity as I originally thought. And this class in particular has opened my eyes to the information and to the facts that these men were beyond what they may have been presented throughout history. On the flip side of that, no one can dispute, or at least to my knowledge they have not, disputed their contributions to the birth of this nation. The early colonial period is often interesting to realize the dedication of not only these forefathers, but to many men and women who contributed to the independence of this country. Like many wars, the foot soldiers are those that we don't often hear about. We don't learn all their names. We don't study those people in textbooks. The women who contributed, such as Molly Pitcher and other women who were a part of the early colonial war, the American Revolution, they contributed in ways that we don't often hear about. In fact, I would dare say if you asked someone on the street about some of those names, they wouldn't have any idea who you were discussing. So when we look at men and women of the early colonial period, and as we talk about Thomas Jefferson, we see that there was more to Thomas Jefferson than just the author of the Declaration of Independence. Interestingly enough, research has indicated that he may not have been the sole author of the Declaration of Independence, and that certainly wouldn't be out of the norm, considering so many men were a part of that time period of the Continental Congress, of this war of independence. So it isn't beyond the scope of thought that he was not the only one that contributed to the Declaration of Independence. When I looked at the research about Thomas Jefferson, and obviously I had already previously read about, not only in this course, about his involvement with Sally Hemings. I'm not sure exactly what the right word is there. Research did indicate that he was the father of her children, but that's still in dispute as time has gone by and the research still continues. Also, Thomas Jefferson, the slave owner, and it was very clear in the research that he did own slaves and would inherit more slaves at the passing of his father-in-law. So there's that Thomas Jefferson. There's the Thomas Jefferson that would invoke the word equity, as my research indicated. When you think about Thomas Jefferson, the slaveholder, and you think about Thomas Jefferson using the word equity, they don't click. In society today where we now see all men and women as created equal, back then it was simply white men. And so for him to use the word equity, it's counterproductive to what we think of today. So that part of Thomas Jefferson certainly is a different side from what he contributed to the birth of this nation. As you look at the research about Thomas Jefferson, it cannot be disputed that he contributed to the beginnings of this country and the government that still is utilized today. We are still a democratic society based on the laws and principles and, for lack of a better term, the outlay of the government that we use today. He was a part of that, and through that, he contributed to a government that has withstood the test of time for over 200 years. Not a perfect government, but a government that was established through the efforts of men and women in this country over 200 years ago who were willing to lay down their lives to have freedom and independence, never knowing that today we celebrate that independence because of their efforts.